And the reason they felt they needed to do that, Jesse, is because if they told their audience the truth, that when gas is the most expensive it's been, flights are super expensive, that 5,000 kids decided to spend a weekend in summer traveling across the country to go hear from conservative speakers, maybe the audience of The View would think twice about all of their ideas. That's why they felt so compelled to try to smear our wonderful summit this last weekend.
Yeah, they have nothing else to talk about.
Imagine a gilded fortress high above the bustling city where narratives are not merely discussed, but forged in the fires of conviction and amplified by the loyal roar of an adoring crowd. For decades, a sovereign voice has echoed from its most prominent throne, a powerful empress whose words, sharp and undeniable, were met with unfailing affirmation, a rhythmic symphony of applause. This was the unchallenged reign of Whoopi Goldberg on The View, a titan of midday television, whose authority seemed as unassailable as the fortress walls themselves. Her opinions, delivered with a signature blend of righteous fury and a knowing glance, sailed effortlessly into the public consciousness, rarely questioned, never truly contradicted within her carefully constructed empire of sound and fury.
CEO of Turning Point USA and the author of the new book, The College Scam. So, Charlie, do you accept The View's apology?
I mean, regardless of whether or not I accept it, the question is, do our students accept it? That's really what's at heart here. They went after our 5,000 students at our event there of high school and college kids. And look, I get attacked all the time. People say false things. I'm a public figure. But when you go after 16 and 17-year-olds that travel from across the country that then have to live for the rest of their life with a shadow over them because someone at ABC says that they might be linked to neo-Nazis.
But what happens when such an empire, built on the seemingly bulletproof foundation of pre-approved consensus, faces an unexpected tremor? What occurs when its most formidable voice encounters a challenge not from a louder shout, not from a direct confrontation in a heated debate, but from a quiet, precise force operating from a distance? A cold, calculated strike delivered not with a roar, but with the brutal, unflinching clarity of logic. This isn't the story of a dramatic on-air meltdown, complete with flung microphones or stormed sets. No, this is something far more chilling, far more profound. This is the tale of a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, a quiet implosion that left a lasting, indelible crack in the armor of a daytime television legend, forever altering the perception of her power and the vulnerability of her throne. Prepare for a reckoning that didn't come with a bang, but with the unsettling silence of truth exposed.
Welcome back. You know, in Monday's conversation about Turning Point USA, I put the young people at the conference in the same category as the protesters outside. And I don't like it when people make assumptions about me, and it's not any better when I make assumptions about other people, which I did. So, my bad. I'm sorry. Okay. So, the state,
The View has long cultivated an image as a vibrant, unfiltered forum for current events. Yet beneath the surface, it functions as an extraordinarily effective echo chamber. Within its carefully constructed set, adorned with plush couches and bathed in flattering studio lights, narratives are not simply debated, they are meticulously curated, passionately delivered, and then celebrated by an audience trained to respond with enthusiastic applause. At the heart of this meticulously choreographed dynamic sits Whoopi Goldberg, a cultural icon and the undisputed queen of the hot take. Her formidable presence, years of experience, and a reputation for speaking her mind have cemented her status. She is the voice of authoritative pronouncement, often punctuated by a dismissive wave of the hand, a piercing stare, or a dramatic pause that signals the end of discussion. For what felt like an eternity, her opinion sailed unchallenged through the show's airwaves, buoyed by consistent applause and a comforting sense of internal consensus from her co-hosts, who often served as validators rather than challengers. The illusion of invincibility was nearly perfect, an almost unbreakable spell cast over millions day after day. This was a place where conviction often outranked contradiction, where volume consistently overshadowed verifiable data, and where the hosts, particularly Whoopi, rarely faced the kind of rigorous external scrutiny that might puncture their carefully maintained bubble of certainty.
But look, what did it take for us to get to the point of an apology? We had to threaten a lawsuit, Jesse. And by the way, we're still entertaining it. We're talking to some of the best lawyers out there that are experts in this. And as you know, these things can be very complicated. There's a lot of facts and circumstances around it. But we're not going to let this go, because you should not be able to smear 5,000 high school and college kids and then just be able to walk away with
gross elitism and her complete out of touch nature with respect to the rest of the world. Sunny Hostin goes on The View and decides now would be a great time to dump all over the so-called uneducated.
What we did not have is white women who voted about 52%, right, for Donald Trump. Uneducated white women, is my understanding.
Just because you didn't go to college doesn't mean you're stupid, and it doesn't mean that you don't have wisdom. You can go to college and get a bunch of irrelevant facts about how men can allegedly give birth or whatever they teach. But I said this to our team. I said working people, the muscular class, including working women, they are so in favor of Trump, and they don't want to be called stupid or uneducated.
Yet, even the most polished of illusions can shatter with a single misplaced word, especially when that word is a factual distortion delivered with an air of absolute certainty. The spark that ignited this unexpected firestorm emerged from a seemingly routine segment in January 2022 as The View discussed Turning Point USA's annual Student Action Summit. This event was a massive gathering of 5,000 high school and college students, representing a significant portion of young conservatives traveling across the country to engage with their movement. On air, during what seemed like another familiar segment of opinion sharing, one of the hosts, Sunny Hostin, made a chillingly inflammatory assertion. She declared, "Neo-Nazis were outside protesting the event and Turning Point USA didn't denounce them." Whoopi Goldberg later amplified and seemingly embraced this claim, stating that Turning Point USA had let them in and metaphorically embraced these neo-Nazis. The damage was immediate and profound. This wasn't merely a difference of political opinion, it was a devastating factual inaccuracy. The neo-Nazis in question were indeed outside protesters, vehemently condemned by Turning Point USA, who even tried to remove them from public property. They had absolutely no affiliation with the event's organizers or attendees. The accusation cast a sinister shadow over thousands of young people, implying a connection to one of the most reviled ideologies in human history. It painted an entire movement, particularly its youth wing, with a brush of guilt by association that was both unverified and deeply damaging. This specific glaring factual error became the exposed fault line, the precise point of weakness in the show's otherwise formidable facade, setting the stage for a conflict that would unfold not in a shouting match, but in the colder, more brutal court of public accountability. The outrage from Turning Point USA and its supporters was swift and ferocious, recognizing that such a malicious smear could not go unchallenged.
We begin with a shocking apology just a short time ago from the ladies of The View to Turning Point USA. A war of words broke out after the conservative group was rallying the next generation of voters at its youth summit in Tampa, Florida this weekend. And the liberal panel just couldn't help themselves. The group sent a scathing cease and desist letter after hosts on The View suggested that Turning Point had embraced neo-Nazis who showed up outside the event. Sean, something that struck me in the cease and desist letter was the sentence that specifically The View host insidiously and cavalierly stated that TPUSA let the neo into its event, metaphorically embraced them, and it went on. Insidiously and cavalierly. And I felt that perfectly summed up exactly what those women were saying, which is something so deeply toxic and also so lightly thrown out there.
And so false. I mean, these were protesters outside of the event, right? They couldn't get in. These were not neo-Nazis inside of Turning Point USA. They were protesting outside on public grounds, and Turning Point tried to remove them.
Enter Charlie Kirk, the astute founder and CEO of Turning Point USA, a figure who understood that confronting the established media machine didn't always require a direct theatrical on-air confrontation. His approach was a masterclass in strategic non-engagement, eschewing the dramatic studio debate, a format The View often controlled to its advantage, for a more surgical strike delivered from the precision and safety of his own digital platform. Kirk chose not to shout louder than the loudest voices on television. Instead, he opted for a calm, calculated, and fact-driven dismantling. He didn't need to be invited onto The View to lay out the irrefutable evidence. From his podcast, a space entirely within his control, he calmly took the controversial statements, analyzed them with cold, clinical precision, and then ruthlessly contrasted them with verifiable facts. He exposed the blatant contradiction. The neo-Nazis were outside, condemned by TPUSA, and had absolutely no connection to the thousands of high school and college students inside the summit. His video wasn't an emotional tirade, it was a display of unwavering logic, a quiet, almost sociopathic confidence in the undeniable truth of his position. He tossed what one might call logic grenades from afar, meticulously dismantling the false narrative piece by piece, creating a ripple effect that would ultimately short-circuit the very story The View had so confidently woven. His power lay not in his decibel level, but in the unforgiving, unflinching brutality of clarity, bypassing the show's usual defenses of interruption, dismissal, and collective agreement. He understood that in the digital age, truth delivered precisely travels further than volume. The immediate aftermath of The View's controversial claims was swift, decisive, and uncompromising. Turning Point USA wasted no time in activating its legal team. They issued a scathing cease and desist letter demanding an immediate on-air retraction and a full apology. More significantly, they backed this demand with a very public and explicit threat of a defamation lawsuit. This wasn't merely a polite request, it was a legal hammer poised to strike with potentially catastrophic force. For a massive network like ABC, and for a high-profile revenue-generating show like The View, a defamation lawsuit carries immense risks, not just staggering financial penalties, but also crippling reputational damage, the messy exposure of internal communications during discovery, and the potential for a devastating public verdict against them. The specter of such a legal battle, which could drag on for years, was a powerful and undeniable deterrent. This legal thunderclap bypassed the usual conversational sparring and hit them directly where they were most vulnerable, their corporate liability. The network, faced with the undeniable factual discrepancies and the very serious legal ramifications, had no choice but to compel its hosts to address the situation publicly. The seemingly unshakable confidence of the daytime panel was now being undeniably shaken by the undeniable weight of legal precedent and a very real threat to their bottom line, forcing a public admission that few had ever expected to see.
I don't want to say too much, but we're going to have a lot of fun at the Department of Education. We're going to have a lot of fun.
Can I tell you something? Like, I've had quite a few people contact me about that particular post. Like, I'm sure I have 1/100th of what you're getting, but people are contacting me about cabinet posts. I'm like, I got
look,
nothing.
I mean, yeah, I'm actually, after this conversation, heading to Mar-a-Lago for a week, and we have a lot to sift through, and if I could be helpful, I have asked. I want to be actively involved in all things education, as you can imagine.
And so the apology came, broadcast live, a moment many viewers had not anticipated witnessing, and one that felt deeply unsettling to The View's loyal audience. Whoopi Goldberg, typically radiating a signature brand of righteous certainty and a commanding stage presence, delivered the statement with a noticeable and uncharacteristic shift in her usual fiery demeanor. She acknowledged the mistake, admitting that she had put the young people at the conference in the same category as the outside protesters. "My bad, I'm sorry," she stated, her words carefully chosen, meticulously articulated, and strikingly devoid of her characteristic passion or any hint of her usual theatricality. Joy Behar, another long-standing co-host, echoed the sentiment, expressing regret for the mischaracterization and attempting to contextualize the initial comments. But what struck many was the palpable difference in Whoopi's delivery. The usual spark in her eyes, the confident tilt of her head, the natural ease of her speech, all seemed subtly muted, reined in, almost robotic. It wasn't a theatrical meltdown, there were no screaming outbursts or tears, but rather a subdued, almost forced admission. This wasn't the Whoopi who dominated discussions with her unfiltered thoughts. This was a Whoopi under immense pressure, visibly performing a corporate directive. The apology, while delivered, felt less like a genuine moment of introspection or remorse, and more like a necessary box being ticked to avert a costly legal battle. It was a visible crack in the armor, a public acknowledgement that even the most formidable voices on television were not immune to accountability, especially when faced with the cold, hard force of legal repercussions. It was a moment of vulnerability, Carefully managed, yet undeniably present for all to see. The immediate apologies were just the beginning. The ripples of this incident spread far beyond the segment itself, leaving a lasting, subtle, yet profoundly significant mark on The View and its powerful host. In the weeks and months that followed, astute viewers began to perceive a distinct, almost palpable shift in the show's atmosphere. The spontaneous, unbridled commentary that once defined the program seemed just a tad more cautious. The host's discussions occasionally veering towards safer, less controversial territory, as if a memo had been issued to avoid another viral misstep. Whoopi herself, while still a commanding presence at the table, sometimes carried an almost imperceptible hesitation, a moment of visual glancing off camera for validation that previously seemed utterly unnecessary for a figure of her stature. Her once ferocious energy, a hallmark of her delivery, felt just a tad more rehearsed, a little too polished, as if she were desperately trying to reenact past highlights while quietly wondering if the audience was still buying the performance. The laughter from the co-hosts sometimes felt less organic, more forced, and a dramatic point occasionally concluded not with a resounding chorus of agreement, but with an awkward cough or a pregnant silence. This wasn't a breakdown in the traditional dramatic sense. It was a quieter, more insidious change, a slow, continuous leak in the show's confidence. The incident had fractured the illusion of untouchable commentary for millions of viewers, planting insidious seeds of doubt and prompting dangerous questions like, wait, did she just make that up? And how did that get applauded? The sacred bubble of daytime TV, once so impenetrable, began to hiss with the unmistakable sound of slow deflation, its carefully crafted mystique diminishing with each passing day. This incident wasn't merely a squabble between a talk show and a conservative youth group. It became a potent, emblematic symbol of a new, irreversible era in media accountability. The internet, that pitiless arena of digital gladiators, played a crucial, amplifying role, turning Charlie Kirk's calm, fact-based rebuttal into a viral phenomenon that spread like wildfire across countless platforms. Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and Twitter Threads exploded with meticulous edits, direct stitches, and impassioned reactions. Reddit discussions multiplied exponentially, becoming hubs for dissecting every nuance of the event. People who hadn't watched The View in years suddenly found themselves intimately familiar with Whoopi's commentary style, not because they tuned in, but because Charlie Kirk had exposed it for what it truly was. A house of cards built on a foundation of smug vibes, now brutally vulnerable to the unforgiving scrutiny of online fact-checkers. This event powerfully demonstrated that traditional, centralized media no longer holds exclusive control over information or narrative. The power had irrevocably shifted. Truth, even delivered from a modest studio with a Wi-Fi connection and a clear point, could now penetrate the most well-guarded echo chambers and challenge the most established voices. It was a resounding testament to the fact that when common sense finally got a Wi-Fi signal, the audience, now a decentralized, discerning network of digital bloodhounds, realized just how long they'd been clapping for sound bites that dissolved on contact with objective facts. The illusion shattered, not with fireworks or dramatic confrontations, but with a quiet, data-driven roast session happening far beyond the safety of commercial breaks, accessible to anyone with a screen and a critical eye. So what remains after such a public, subtle unraveling? While Whoopi Goldberg, an enduring icon of television, undoubtedly continued her daily declarations, the dynamic surrounding her shifted irrevocably. The audience, now armed with the undeniable knowledge of how easily a powerful narrative could be punctured by a simple fact check, couldn't unsee what had been revealed. The magic trick of unchallenged authority had been explained, the curtain lifted, and the wizard, however beloved, looked a little more ordinary, a little more human. This wasn't merely a moment, it was a cultural inflection point, a reckoning that arrived not with a scream, but with 1,000 furious retweets and a single brutal fact bomb delivered from a guy who never even had to walk onto the studio stage. The incident served as a stark, unforgettable reminder that in the unforgiving age of digital scrutiny, where calculators are always ready and where cold, hard receipts talk infinitely louder than passionate rhetoric, even the most bulletproof fortresses of truth are suddenly undeniably vulnerable. The future of media will be defined not by who shouts loudest or who commands the most adoring applause, but by who can withstand the silent, relentless audit of reality. And for The View, and for Whoopi Goldberg, a subtle, permanent scar remains, an echoing reminder of the day the unwavering applause finally faltered, and the Emperor's hot take was seen to have no clothes.